Okay, all set.
Perfect. So good afternoon. Welcome to our presentation. We are in the early stages of trying to design a bilingual OER. First of all, let's introduce ourselves. I am Melixa Abad Izquierdo. And here it is. Introduce yourself.
I'm Dan Wolfen, and yes, our goal is to kind of bridge our disciplinary expertise. Melixa is a professor of history. I'm the computational research instruction librarian at Columbia University with a lot of experience with data and non-English data subjects. And so we want to try to bridge this expertise to build some responsible and transparent bilingual OER focused on Spanish media history and literacy.
And my goal is to develop a catalog of Mexican TV shows from 1950 to 1960. I am someone whose research has been in Mexican telenovelas, Mexican TV history. One of the problems is that with the advent of videotape, everything has been kept. The main company to do that has done TV in Mexico, for a long time, only really keeps in their archives everything that was videotaped. So that means anything from roughly 1960, 61 to the present. But during the 1950s, because the technology to record was so expensive, kinescope or reel and all,
Reel to reel.
Thank you, reel to reel. Very few of those programs have been preserved. And well,
So the project is to kind of build first a robust catalog of these lost Mexican TV shows from this time period of 1950 to 1960, and then to use that catalog to kind of create new tools and new OER around that are interactive, like web applications or data dashboards, so that students can actually work with the primary sources and explore them in their original languages and to build lesson plans around it. This would make the project accessible in both Spanish and English. And also, you'll see is going to be a shift from the way that a lot of data and also a lot of OER is done.
yeah. So to give you more, none of you probably are Mexican historians, so let me give you a little bit of background. So, like I mentioned before, they were not recorded. The other problem is that there were several company changes. So you have three independent channels operating from 1950 to 1955. Then they mixed together, but again, no filming or very little filming. And then that same company gets another fusion in 1968 and then another change in 1973. And for anyone who has trying to do history of private companies, every time there are those kinds of changes of administration, it's a pain to really historicize. What I've been doing to try to fill that gap, given that those videos don't exist, is looking at archival material, most of it located in Mexico City. Who authored it? It's a little bit sketchy because for some reason, very few of the media critics want to sign with their own name. But the good thing is that the newspapers at that time, that 1950s is the heyday of newspaper in Mexico. So you have Excelsior, Novedades, that actually are covering the new medium of TV and start publishing the program, the TV guides. And just a few years later, even in 1950, we see some of the first TV focused magazines who will sort of give reviews of all the shows that have been broadcast. The good thing is that in the early 50s, there's not that many shows, but things get difficult starting in like 1952 when you have a couple of dozens. And it's not until 1952 that actually that's the year when Teleguia appears, the Mexican version of TV Guide. Another important source, memoirs. Many of the people who work on TV were actually artists in other genres, radio, theater, and a bunch of them actually publish memoirs. So here, just to give you an idea, of what that timeline looks like and why we are doing this and it needs. I think actually perhaps if none of you are media scholars, for US television, there's a catalog already. It's been, I think it was done back in the 1990s and it actually includes the 1950s. But Mexican TV, which is the main media exporter in the Spanish language, doesn't has a catalog. And it's an important gap in the historiography. It also, if, to not get too political, also sort of speaks about the issues of censorship and authoritarianism that Mexico suffered during that time period and how media, aka the TV stations, often were allied or complice with the authoritarian regime. That's why, if you notice, when I mentioned Channel 4 and I mentioned Romulo, the family of Romulo Farril, he actually is the first person to get the permit to run a TV station, and he was a very good friend of the president at that time, Miguel Alemán. And just to give you a little bit of gossip, the person who actually had the more experience in media, the contacts in the United States to get the cameras and all the technology was actually Emilio Azcárraga Vidaurreta, which was not denied, it was just delayed and given to this friend of the president before, in part because Emilio had supported an opposition candidate in the election of 1940. So you see there how politics really are underneath all these media issues in Mexico. And actually, last but not least, if you think this is not important anymore, Emilio Azcárraga, who just finally stepped down from being the president of Televisa, the main TV network in Mexico and the main exporter of Spanish TV, had to step down because he's been accused to be involved in bribes to have the rights for FIFA in 2016. And don't think the Emilio Azcárraga who just stepped down is the same one from 1950s. It's his grandson. But
one thing to note about this too, why this is so important, is not just that this OER would open up these questions for students, and not just is that Mexican TV, it was not just played in Mexico. It was they exported to all of Latin America and to Spanish speaking areas of the United States, like New York and Florida at that time. So
and LA.
And LA. So it goes beyond just Mexico. It is pretty much it was the main source of mass media at that time. So historically, it is much more important than it just one country's TV station. It had its feelers in everywhere.
Oh yeah, everywhere. And they actually have a lot. What you're gonna start seeing is that in the 1950s, the place to make your career was Mexico. So the mambo craze actually was all over the Western Hemisphere in the 1950s, but Mexican TV played an important role in that as well as Mexican radio. Anyway, but I digress. So how is the status? So far, I've been able to catalog 1950, 1951. There are very little programs there. One of the problems is that it's a one-lady show. I am going through all these TV guides, putting them on an Excel, and then on a Word document, I am just sort of putting when a show starts and ends. And in the 1950s, shows were in 1950, 1951, sorry, to be specific, many of the shows were just sort of like 3, 4 episodes that were sponsored, usually by big companies. I run into some limitations between 1950 and 1955 because I have to consult 2 different newspapers to get the TV guides from all the 3 TV stations. By 1955, things will get easier and you could see them all, but it's part of the reason why it's what it's taking me so long. Plus, I have a full-time job teaching. What I as a historian will need now is the the TV guides from Excelsior from 1952 and 1955. Those are the ones that cover Channel 2. Those are not too difficult. I can go to the library, the New York Public Library, and get them. I just at some point this break I'll go in and do that. But let
Yeah, so we're in the data collection phase, basically using my language or like using data language. The problem that the problem that we're trying to address broadly is that we're studying a topic that was primarily Spanish and influential throughout the most of the Americas.
Yeah.
But most OER is in English, and even on English OER is translated from English. According to UNESCO, it's just dominated, and you can see here from a UNESCO backing report that the OER Commons 90% English based on what I can see, and so working in a field that is English and Global North dominated opens up some interesting questions for us. Next slide. So we had some decisions to make. One thing is that I insisted on is that we started organizing and curating the data immediately. And by doing that, we had to decide things like what should the variable names be? How should we handle this? Because we shouldn't do it just in English. And a lot of data sets or catalogs are just in English. Having it title or having it author versus, what is that in Spanish? Title and author.
Título y autor. Although I was surprised how good your Spanish is. He called me about like, you need to spell better.
We've also known each other for 20 years.
Oh,
So making a bilingual data set or catalog has its issues, but more importantly, one of the first decisions we made was it needs to be Spanish first. It should follow the FAIR standards. And then from there, we can build upon that and build lesson plans and other things. And this is because we were curating the data from the very beginning while it's being collected. This will ensure that anything that's created from it is embedded with the original language immediately, and that it is primary, not secondary. English is going to be secondary here. It's going to avoid later translation issues. And for people who are bilingual or who learn Spanish first or from Latin America, which is all of Latin America, because this is all of their history, it's going to be more accessible from a language perspective. From a technological perspective, we'll figure that out later. But by curating it actively and from the beginning, we're asking these questions immediately, talking about how we need to structure this beyond the historical process, which is different from that. So we have to translate it from primary research to what it should look like with data, and to do this iteratively over time, thinking about the final project. And the last problem is pretty much finding, as Melissa mentioned, time. She teaches full-time, I work full-time, and I have a part-time job because, librarians. So finishing the primary source research, you can talk about that.
Well, I know because I've been doing research in Mexican television. I know where most of these sources are. I've been doing this now for 20 years. I have a great sense of where to find it. And actually, I have to admit, living in New York and the New York Public Library, it's a good second to get some of this information. But again, what often you need is time. I would love to have grad students who either do media or history of Latin America or even cultural studies. One of the things that I have found is that because of the Spanish Civil War, well, this is known, of course, if you're a historian, but you have all these Spanish refugees working on Mexican TV in 1950, 51, 52, and all this zarzuela, Spanish operetta, in part because it's cheap. They don't have to pay any licensing. They're using Spanish operetta from the 1880s. But so see how while studying Mexican television, we are learning all these cultural connections of the whole Spanish speaking world. And the training and hiring, it's not particularly that difficult. Can you read it well? Can you take good pictures? And I will say the only challenge will be trying to figure out who are the authors of the plays they adapt for TV. Because that's one of the issues I have found with the original material, which is something that Dan really focused to me. I want to know that that it's well done from the get go. So that play was done in this channel at this time, this day, but it was originally published in this place, written by this person, and done, in Spain, in Mexico, etc., etc. And that takes a little bit of time. Although there's a few good databases of plays and Spanish operetta to find them.
And for me, it's taking that work and finding efficient ways to translate it to the data and to clean it and to validate it, and do so in a replicable and reproducible way. I do know how to do that, but it still takes time to do that while being true to the data subjects, the data sources, and the eventual audience, which is who we're working for no matter what. So funding and time are really the roadblocks right now with this project. And I can't do what I need to do until she finishes what she needs to do. Because anything that's done, yes, the pipeline can be created, but if it has to be, if it has to be changed, it has to be changed. But like, it's best to at least have everything in ballpark range. So eventually we want to have a data catalog for researchers, as I mentioned, Spanish first, English second. So English is a translation in this case, a web app for students to learn to work with primary materials, maybe involving images, but definitely involving, can you find this? Can you find that? So it's a data literacy and a historical literacy and a media literacy project. But that web app would also be, again, Spanish first and translated to English, and then lesson plans to support using both the catalog and the web app in classes or on their own or as research, because this is original research that can support other original research. And next steps, we kind of trying to find funding for historical research and assistance. For me, continue fine-tuning the data pipeline, and then once we have, let's say, up to 1955, start creating the demos and draft lesson plans. So we'd love to hear if you have any ideas. I hope this wasn't too historical for a librarian conference, but yeah, I can talk about data, Melissa can talk about the topic, and we look forward to your questions.
And now just to show you, so this is the one from 1955. Obviously, I don't do, and just to, if it's not clear, I only am cataloging the ones that were produced in Mexico. I'm not doing the enlatados, the reels from the USA. I'm writing them down, but my main focus is the productions done in the in Mexico. Although I actually been surprised how much from the United States they are playing in 1952. And this is the ones I'm right now working. This is just one channel 4. So I think the main problem is that it could be a bit of perfectionist. And every time I see something like this one at 21:30, 22:30, I go into a rabbit hole. Well, this is the name of the play. Who is the author? Who are all those people? And trying to fill the gaps, because as you can see, it's really very limited information. That's actually what is taking me the longest time. I enjoy it very much. But
thank you, and we look forward to your questions. And I would go on to my own rant about data with that point, but we look forward to your questions.
Thank you both so much. I do see one question in the chat. Lisa would like to know why you chose materials from the 1950s and 60s instead of the 1980s, for example.
Because those aren't lost. So by lost media, that means that all of the records, all of the originals, all of the recordings are no longer there. So it's a more interesting historical question. It also opens up to media literacy. And it's her specialty. So I did not question.
No, No, and I have that. No, those are great points. So, because, like he said, they are not lost. Also, now with streaming platforms, this is something that's been working for 20 years, Televisa. There's this app called VIX. If you have Prime, you might be able to upload it, and then they have VIX Premium. And what they have been doing since 2006 is take all those videos, digitize them. So eventually, and that's what historians also hope, all of the things they have produced from roughly 1962 to the present are digitized and available on that platform, sort of an archive by streaming. Obviously, because of the political issues that I have mentioned, as well as another problem, because I have worked in, I had access to the archive in 2006, 2007. There are two things. There are things that maybe are inappropriate to show because it will make look X or Y in the government bad. And number two is derechos de autor. Oh, what's the name of that? Trademarks and the rights of author. Copyright, thank you. And the copyright. Because often they were doing, one of the problems I've noticed in Mexican TV is that copyright, and particularly going back to the 60s and 70s, wasn't as clear. And there are a few materials that they're not showing they have the copyright, even though it was broadcasted in their TV stations.
And I will also say, like, even into the 60s and 70s, shows where the archival copies were reused a lot. So there are shows that are lost in time throughout that period.
Yeah.
But like this period especially is just one that even I'm interested in, and I stopped studying history about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So does anyone else have any questions or suggestions? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire.
Well, thank you both so much for participating today. We appreciate you being here and sharing this great information.
Yes, thank you very much. And